to be here, and also to have so many great colleagues joining us online from across the Philippines. So thank you everybody for being with us today. I'll just do a few words about Nisai Trust. We've worked for quite some time now in developing responses for children, young people and adults who are struggling to get access to education. So what I'm just going to do is share my screen, if I can, if that's possible. No, it's not going to let me. Sorry, apologies. I don't seem to have screen share. So what we do is we undertake action research to increase knowledge about non-traditional education routes. And we do cutting edge projects to further development of non-traditional education. And we raise awareness and campaign on those non-traditional routes. And what really matters to us is that we are fulfilling the goals of the United Nations Development Goals, and in particular, education goal, which is number 4. So we are passionate about ensuring equal access to education and training for vulnerable people. And at the moment, post-COVID, what we're seeing, and I know that Todd will be talking about this later on, what we're seeing is that there are a huge amount of vulnerable people who are becoming more vulnerable in every country that we work in, across Asia, Europe, and also North America. Okay, so what we are really trying to do through these webinars is to have a discussion and a debate about what makes a difference for all these young people that are finding the COVID lockdown and the situations they find themselves in really, really hard in every society in which we work. I hope that you'll be able to get quite a lot of value out of what this discussion will be today, and that you will be able to come away with at least some ideas around what might be different for you and for your children. What I'd like to do now, if I could please, is to introduce our first speaker today. Our first speaker is Dr. Todd Cunningham from the University of Toronto. He's a clinical and school psychologist. He's an assistant professor, and he's chair of the School of Clinical Child Psychology program at the university. He investigates supporting students with learning difficulties from assessment to intervention, and has done a whole set of work around what is actually happening for our young people during lockdown and learning loss. I know that Todd's got a lot to give us today, and I really hope that you will be able to talk to him later when we finish about some of the questions that he raises around what's happening for young people at the moment. Thank you, Todd. Over to you.
Great. Thank you, Paul, for the introductions, and thank you to Nisai for putting this on today. So let me just start sharing here. So when it comes to looking at students, we've really gone through a bunch of different phases with this, with COVID and its impact on online learning. And really, we kind of see the online learning environment is breaking down into kind of 3 separate phases. The first phase was online learning that was taking place before COVID era came around. These were times where educators really thought about how to create a really good online learning environment for students, took time to develop curriculum, learn the different online tools that they needed to be able to provide quality educational services to their students. Students who chose to be part of online learning environments, maybe because the traditional in-class environment was not supporting them, or maybe for geographic reasons, they could not access a local school. So there's a lot of reasons why online learning was taking place, and the early research on online learning really showed that being online and being in a brick and mortar building face to face was equivalent. There was no issues. But then COVID came about, and depending where you are in the world, in Canada, March was a really important time for us when we started to lock down our schools. We shut down our schools. And at that point, we went into emergency learning, emergency online learning, were educators who weren't trained on using online techniques. Suddenly overnight were told that they had to take their traditional face-to-face in a brick and mortar classroom techniques of learning and then suddenly stick them online and trying to talk to their students through video. Now, I know for my two kids, I have a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old. And during that time, we're one of those families who started to opt out of school just because the connection was not great. The quality of instruction was not where we were looking at. And our students, especially my 6-year-old, I could tell that she was not engaged. I could always tell by the fact of if she was engaged or not, because when she was engaged and like listening to the stories the teacher was reading, she'd be sitting there with her computer in hand. And when she was disengaged, her feet would be up in the air. She'd be turning around in her chair, spinning, spinning, spinning. And yes, she was not engaged. The next phase then we went into that really started in the new school year. In Canada, that was in September of 2020, was where our educators had some time to try and put together a new online learning package to spend the summer practicing online techniques and try to engage students in a new format. And so today I'm going to start talking about some of the past research that kind of helps us understand what we might be expecting when we come out of COVID, when we finally return to more of that normal in-person, face-to-face learning. What are some of the things that we should be expecting to see as we get there? Now, as educators, all of you know, learning is quite complex when it comes to helping students. This is what I call learning profile. It's all of the skills and abilities that one must have to be a good student. And really a good student to be able to engage in day-to-day learning. On the right-hand side, these are all of our abilities, our sensory abilities to be able to take in information. We need to be able to hear and see well to be able to learn. We have to have good motor outputs. Our ability to write well and our ability to communicate orally are vital to be able to demonstrate our learning. We have our cognitive abilities, especially our ability to attend to what our teachers are thinking or are talking about so that we can acquire that information. Our oral language abilities are vital to be able to understand what our teachers are saying, but again, to be able to express our learning, as well as how we're feeling about education and a feeling about ourselves in our learning. We know that students who don't feel safe in the classroom, who are worried, aren't able to attend to what the teachers are saying. And we've really seen this in Canada, where students who were coming back to school in September were quite fearful about catching COVID, were fearful of that they would bring it home to their loved ones, and therefore were having a hard time sitting in a class with other kids wearing masks and the teachers wearing masks, being 6 feet apart, and therefore they're having a hard time attending to learning. On the left-hand side, these are all the skills that a student has to learn. These are not natural. These are things that we have to, as educators, teach our students so that they can be able to be good students, to be good learners. We have to teach students how to be organized, to be able to organize their work, their time, the information that they're acquiring. We have to teach students how to read, to acquire that information off the page, starting with the ability to decode the words, to read them fast and accurately, and then to understand what they're reading. To be able to demonstrate their learning through the writing output, to be able to engage in mathematics and learning, to be able to take good notes, to be able to track their learning, and also the critical thinking skills, to be able to apply strategies to be able to acquire information and solve novel problems. So as COVID hit and as we went into that emergency learning period and this online learning period or disruptive learning over the last 15 months now, we really turned to past research to start to understand what might we begin to expect. And there was a lot of research that has been done through the 20th first century that has been looking at what's known as the summer slide. And the summer slide really shows that during a typical school year, students acquire at a very good rate of information. They develop their reading and mathematical skills. However, when we hit the summer, something happens. That learning changes. They're no longer engaged in reading and doing math on a day-to-day basis. And over the course of the summer, the typical student begins to slide backwards. Their skills lose about a month worth of learning over the course of the summer. And then when they get back in the fall and sit in front of their educators, they begin to learn again. We know that that literacy and numeracy are affected differently. We know that literacy skills typically aren't affected as much by the summer slide as do numeracy skills. More students have the ability to continue to work on their literacy skills to kind of help develop their literacy skills by reading on a regular basis. And not as many students choose to sit down and do math problems or do math games over the summer, which leads to them not developing as much through math. When we hit COVID and hit the emergency lockdowns that happened across the globe, the Netherlands was a case study, kind of the best case study that began to talk about this summer slide or begin to demonstrate the effect of what this summer slide was going to have on our learners. So the Netherlands, their education system is, as many of ours, went immediate into shutdown, where they went online for half of March, April, and May, but they did return to school in June. During that lockdown in the Netherlands, there is equal funding opportunity for all students in the country. So students had equal access to devices. The school, the country also has very good internet infrastructure, which has been a foundational infrastructure that is needed to allow online learning to take place. And so when the Netherlands looked at their national testing that is done in January, February each year, and then also again in June each year, they found that during that emergency online learning period, that there was about a 3 percentile loss across all students. That losing that kind of 2.5 months worth of in-person learning, having a disruptive and disjointed online learning experience as teachers were rushing to try and get their classes online, led to kind of a 3% loss in education for their students. And so when we think about this makes a lot of sense. If I think about academic skills, our ability to read, write, and do math, these are skills that really require our brains to develop certain connections. Our brains are actually developing neural connections to be able to allow these skills to develop. And for all of us, it's kind of like going to the gym. You know, if we were working out before COVID hit, and then when COVID hit, we stopped going to the gym, and then return to the gym tomorrow after 15 months of not going there, we're not going to be able to do the same type of weightlifting that we could have done beforehand. If you're not going to use it, you do lose it. If students aren't actually practicing the reading skills every single day, if they're not practicing writing or doing math, then those skills that are needed to facilitate their learning, they're not going to develop. And in fact, they will start losing some of those skills over time. Just like the muscles in the rest of our body, we have to continue to use them to be able to keep them fit. If we're not using our academic skills, then we do lose those skills. However, this use of the skills has not impacted students equally across the board. Not all students have lost those abilities because some students have continued to have opportunity to work on their reading, writing, and math despite not being able to have good online learning. So when we go back to the summer slide effects, when we look at these issues from the past, we learned that not all students are equally impacted by the summer. In fact, what we can do is we actually see that there's three groups of students from the data that really does emerge. You have one group of students who, when they hit the summer, they continue to learn. They do a great job and their skills continue to develop. They are either through their family or through the resources available to them and their abilities, they continue to practice reading or writing or doing math. And so their academic skills continue to develop over and over time. You have then your kind of typical student who kind of hovers. And then you have students who don't have that access to learning, who don't have the resources at home or don't have the supports. And those are the students who actually we see the greatest decline. In the province I live in Canada, in the province of Ontario, in 2013, this was studied in depth. And what was found is if we took the literacy skills of the top 25% of students and compared them to the literacy skills of the bottom 25% students, we found that over the course of the summer, that top 25% of students, they made about 3 months of additional gains in their literacy skills. Whereas that bottom 25%, those students lost about 3 months of literacy skills over the course of the summer. And so when they returned in September, there was about a 6-month gap, a half a year gap between those who already had the abilities and could read versus those who were struggling with readers. And this is really where I'm concerned of when we return back to school. If this literature kind of shows us that over the course of a 2-month break, which is our summer holidays in Canada, if just 2 months leads to about a 6-month gap between those who are able to learn and have access and versus those who are having challenges and don't have access, then what is 15 months of learning going to do for the development of those academic skills? We know that there's something called the achievement gap. And the achievement gap basically goes like this. Over the course of any given school year, students make about one curriculum level worth of gains. They learn about, the curriculum needed for a grade 1 student or a grade 2 student or a grade 3 students. However, if I have a learning challenge of some sort, if I have learning challenges over that course of that year, I'm not going to actually make the same gains in learning. My reading skills won't develop as well. I won't spend as much time being able to keep up with the day-to-day learning. And so over the course of that 1 year, I am not going to fully acquire that knowledge. And then I do this again the next year, and the next year, and the next year. And so over time, what happens is the gap between those who are able to learn and have the means to be able to learn versus those who don't have the ability to learn or don't have the means to be able to engage in learning, that gap between them gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So in Canada, if we know that taking 2 months of school leads to about a 6-month gap between those who can or having weaknesses, this is what I'm worried about when we return in September. I think when we do return, educators are going to be faced with a situation where they are going to have such variability in their students. Some students who are going to continue to be making those progresses that they would expect them to be are right on par. Some students who are kind of in the middle, but then I think we're going to have a whole spread of students near the bottom with different levels of weaknesses that are, or learning loss that has begun to emerge. And as educators, we're really going to have to be able to try and identify our different groups of students so that we know we can be able to help them. So what are some of the indicators we need to be thinking about that might help us understand who are the students that we need to be targeting? Who are the students that we might need to spend more time with when we do return after the lockdowns are done? Well, we can first look to the kind of the, again, looking at the summer slide research to give us some directions. And again, so this is just 2 months of lost instructional time. We know that students who come from families that don't have access to reading materials, so having access to books, often don't do as well. They lose ground. We know that students who don't have family who can be able to promote them or encourage them to be able to learn, who don't value education to the same degree, they're unlikely to have difficulties, as well as students who have special needs, students who don't have the ability to access the online learning is also impacted. Another group that we really have to take into consideration when it comes to COVID is also students who actually had access to online learning. Students who had devices that were at home that were available, and students who had the internet capacity to be able to do it. Some really good work that has come out of China that looked at middle school students who had access to online learning versus those who did not have access to online learning due to not having a device or not having internet, found that that there was about a 0.22 standard deviation difference. There's a significant difference between these two populations. Again, those who had the online learning did better than those who did not. So the key factors that we're looking for when we're starting to think about students is first, access. Did students have access to materials to facilitate their learning that was going on? Now, access to materials during COVID did not necessarily mean that you had to have internet access. I've worked with a lot of our Indigenous communities in Canada where those communities do not have good internet infrastructures, and so they could not do online learning. In one community, the bus drivers would go around each morning with materials for the class or for the students, and they go from house to house to house, dropping off the materials and collecting yesterday's materials from the homes so that their teachers could mark them and give their students feedback. So this way, even though they couldn't do online learning, they were still promoting remote learning from taking place. In terms of when they could gather, teachers did outside learning. So they would go to the park and be able to teach to their students. So there was a lot of creative ways of trying to provide students access to materials. But again, even just having access to materials doesn't always make it work. Sometimes you need to have that supportive learning environment. Parents have to value education to be able to encourage their students to learn. We know right now in Canada, we're seeing a lot of our students who are age 12 to 16, their level of motivation to be online is decreasing a lot. It's warm outside, they've been online for so long, they just don't want to continue to keep learning. And so they need parents to help to encourage them to stay online. For other students, they might be at a home where there might be only one computer and there are 6 kids to access that one computer, so they don't have access to that device. Or they're sitting in a room with their 4 other siblings and everybody's talking over each other. So again, there's not an environment that can support that learning. So just because they might have access to a device or even internet, there are other factors that might be impacting their ability to have an environment to learn that disrupts them. And the third thing is our students who have difficulties in their ability to learn. maybe they have attentional difficulties, or they have a specific learning disorder, or autism, or another disorder. These students in general have a harder time accessing and sustaining their attention to be able to learn. And these students also are falling further and further behind. However, though it kind of looks a bit grim about the range of abilities that we're going to come out of COVID, there's some good news. One thing we do know that just by providing some supports over the course of the summer can really help to start to close that gap. In Ontario, back in 2015, we tried to start to correct for the summer slide. Over the course of the summer, we provided learning opportunities to those students who were that were in the bottom 25%. And we found that that was able to increase their learning, and so that gap was not as wide. Whatever we can do over the course of the summer to encourage our students or provide the means to be able to access literacy and numeracy materials, to help support parents to work with their children to do some learning at home, is going to be really important to try and start to promote and support those students. But as they return after the summer, then it's really going to fall to the educators to kind of figure out, where are our students? Who are the students that I'm going to need to target my attention to? Again, not all students are going to be equally impacted by being in online schooling or having disrupted schooling over the course of the time this year. Some students are going to be more disrupted than others. And it's important for educators to be able to differentiate those students. Who are the students who are doing well? Who are the students who are doing okay? And who are the students who really need my attention? Now, luckily, we live in a fantastic time in education. It's actually a very exciting time in education, because we have a lot of the tools now and knowledge about how to quickly be able to differentiate our students' reading, writing, and math abilities. There's a set of tools, assessment tools, called curriculum baseline measures. These are 1-minute tests that can be administered to a student to be able to quickly get a gauge at how is their literacy, numeracy, or writing abilities developing. So in the course of reading, we know that there are 4 main stages that students go through. The first stage is really learning the sounds and acquiring those sounds to letters. The second stage is really starting to be able to sound out and decode words and starting to read words fast and accurately. The next stage is really continuing to build up that reading speed, reading fluently, and starting to work on understanding and comprehension. And the last stage is really the ability to read for learning. I can apply the skill of reading to be able to learn. We have these wonderful different tests that we can administer across the different grades and ages to assess where is a student in their developmental on these developmental trajectories, and is the student at a point where I'd expect them to be or not. So, for example, when it comes to reading, I can put a simple passage in front of the student. This is like a grade 2 reading passage that I can present to the student. I would just ask the student to start reading out loud to me, and I'd get my stopwatch and start. As I listen to the student read, if they misread a word, I just simply put a slight cross through it. Or if it took them more than 3 seconds to read a word, I'd put a cross through it. And at the end of that 1 minute, I tell the student to stop. I would count up all the words they read in that 1 minute, and I can compare those to some norms. Or I could rank all of my students' reading abilities in my class, and I could, on this test, and I could see, okay, who are the students who read the most words in that 1 minute? They're my students who are doing well. What are the students who had some challenges? And who are the students who are really, really low? And when we do this with any given class, we really find there's 4 groups that emerge. We usually have 1 or 2 students who did fantastically well. They got tons of words they read in 1 minute. Then we have a large group of students who did okay on the test. Then we get into our two problematic groups. One group that read about 5 to 8 words, and then the other group that probably only read 1 or 2 words in that 1 minute. And suddenly we know that we have two separate groups that we need to really spend a lot of attention to. Those students who read 1 or 2 words, we're going to have to go back probably to the beginning and really help develop, or maybe ask for special resources to support those students. Those students who read around 8 words, we can go in and as a classroom teacher, give them twice as much time on reading each day to support their trying to develop that skill. Those students are doing really well at the top. We don't have to give them a lot of time. We know that they're doing okay. We can devote our time now to those lower students. And then we can use these tests to actually monitor the students' progress. We can do them every week or every other week for those low students, and we can actually track their progress over time and actually see how they are developing. And if they're not developing, if we're having weaknesses, then we might have to change what we're doing with those students to try and promote their growth. And what we want to do is finally get their growth to a point where they're exceeding what we would expect them to be developing at. We want them to be exceeding so that they can start to catch up to where we need them to be at the end of the year. So these curriculum baseline measures not only help us to screen our students to know who are the students we have to give more attention to, but it also allows us to monitor our students' growth so that we can see that their skills are developing, so we can help them catch up. And to be able to help them catch up takes two things. One, it takes the approach that we do with those bottom students. We need to really target our interventions to be able to work at the foundations of the academic skill. We have to be able to have a sequential approach to being able to develop those skills. We have to do a lot of practice with them, but we can't move them too fast. We can't make the work too difficult or they disengage from us. Often we have to do this in small groups. You have to give them some strategies along the way. And we also have to do attribution retraining. We have to let them know that they're doing a great job and give them a lot of praise. For what do we need to target? Well, in the area of literacy, in the area of reading, we have to kind of target both the oral language skills, our vocabulary, our knowledge of the sounds of the language, as well as we have to target the text level, our ability to know the alphabet and the sounds that go with the letters, our ability to blend those sounds together to be able to form words, and then to be able to read those words accurately and be able to look for meaningful chunks within our words, and then the comprehension strategies that are there. The Balanced Literacy Diet is a fantastic website that can provide educators with the knowledge and examples of expert teachers demonstrating how to target these different areas of literacy to be able to support students' learning. Though COVID-19 has provided a lot of challenges, and though it's going to create a situation where when we do return to the normal, that we are going to have a larger spread, a larger variability in students' abilities, I am hopeful that through our new tools that we have available to be able to quickly assess and identify students who are having weakness, plus the knowledge that we have on how to be able to intervene, that educators can continue to make that significant difference in students' lives, so that those students who were impacted the most by COVID will be able to get back to where we need them to be. Thank you very much.
Wow. Thank you, Todd. I think that was, I hope you can hear me. I think that was
Yes.
Great. I think that was an amazing presentation that I think lots of us in education will be recognizing. Certainly, I spend time in schools at the moment where the main concern is, what does catch up look like? We all know it has to come, but I think that gives us a really clear routeway into thinking about what catch up looks like. It also, I think, challenges us to think about where is the best place to put the money. And there's something really significant about valuing our teachers and our teachers' practice and the tools that they have, rather than perhaps looking at should we say, more fashionable responses to these issues. So thank you, Todd. And Todd will be back with us later on for some questions. And I'm sure everybody out there will have a whole lot of those for him. But in the meantime, I'm really pleased to be able to introduce to everybody Assistant Secretary Ambat. Assistant Secretary Ambat is the lead official in strengthening and expanding the implementation of the alternative learning system, the ALS program in the Philippines. We are so lucky to have her with us today. It's a real honor. With ASEC Ambat at its helm, the ALS task force has formulated and reviewed policies and operationalized programs that have made a real impact on the lives of young people in the Philippines. And it's a tough old job. I can really appreciate the scale at which you're working. And then what I think has been very impressive is that within 3 years of the consultation, that ASEC Ambat has managed to lead ALS to finalise the K-12 basic education curriculum. That is a really serious achievement, given the amount of work that we knew needed to be done. So really appreciate that you're here. I'm glad that you can join us, and we're really interested in your perspective. Thank you.
Good afternoon to our friends who are joining us in this webinar, of course, to our partners in Nisai Trust. I am happy to be presenting to you this afternoon the reasons for the increase in number of school dropouts pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and post-pandemic. I will be sharing my screen, and of course, I understand that there are several participants from the Department of Education. So hello to my Department of Education family. Some of the slides that I will show, I bet you are already familiar with, but please still stay tuned and listen so that we can together come up with perhaps solution, or let's think through what we can do to remedy the situation of increasing dropouts resulting to more out-of-school youth and adults in our country. So I will share. So as mentioned, I will talk about the causes of increasing number of school dropouts in the pre, during, and post-pandemic era. I'm basing my report on the annual poverty indicator survey that is conducted by the Philippine Statistics Authority. So the report looks at the different aspects of the lives of Filipinos, and it also tackles the education conditions of Filipino families. So these are the reasons why Filipinos are not in school pre-pandemic. So the 2017 Annual Poverty Indicator Survey says that more than 11 million Filipinos aged 6 to 24 were not attending school. That is a big number, considering that we have been making we have been giving investments, we have been implementing policies to ensure that access to education will be more democratic, it will reach more Filipinos. But as you are seeing now on your screen, here are the reasons for them not attending school. In 2017, they were saying 24.8% of Filipinos aged 6 to 24, so this will be your children and youth, they are looking for work or are employed. And then the second reason, majority of them, a lot of them said that they have family matters to deal with. So either they got married early, they got pregnant, are tending to young families, or perhaps they are standing as the head of the families at such young ages. And then there are also 17.2% who are saying that they're not in school, they dropped out because they lack personal interest. And this is something that the Department of Education is closely looking at, because when you say education, it's innate in Filipinos that we want to finish high school, we want to finish college so that we can put our diplomas up our walls at homes and to show to visitors that this is something that we have achieved. But then the 17.2% saying that they're not interested in education. So it's one of the puzzles that we in the Department of Education are trying to address. And with the recent reforms that we have introduced, we hope that this reason, this lack of personal interest, will somehow those who are citing it as a reason for not being in school will somehow decrease. And of course, there's a high cost of education and financial concerns. Of course, there are those, since this is 6 to 24 years old, pre-K to 12, we assume that the learners have already graduated college by the time that they are 22 years old. So it's not surprising that they say that they already finished schooling. And then there's also the reason for another reason will be illness or disability, and then accessibility to schools, problem with school, too young to go to school. So this was in 2017. The Philippine Statistics Authority did another annual poverty indicator survey. Before proceeding there, let me show a disaggregated data of who is it, the boys or is it the girls who's saying the same these reasons. So for those looking for employment, there are more males who are looking for employment. That's why they're not in school. And then when it comes to marriage and family matters, more females say that they are not in school due to this reason. And then for lack of personal interest, it's the males who are saying that who are saying this reason. And same for high cost of education and financial concern. It's still the males. It's not surprising because they are also the ones looking for work. So there's no disconnect in that one. So this slide shows by age group how many per age group are not attending school in 2017. So there are still about 26.5% are between the ages of 3 to 5. So this is your ECCD, this is your kindergarten. Of course, we're trying to extract the data so that we can get how many of these are 5 years old, because in the Philippines, as you may know, we have the kindergarten law, which mandates that all 5-year-olds should attend kindergarten before they can be admitted to first grade. And we cannot overemphasize how important it is for the learners to be in school by the time they're 5 years old, because we don't want to be facing the dilemma of having overage kids in grades, in certain grades, especially for kindergarten. For the Department of Education, we have made efforts to ensure that the 5-year-olds would be in school. We have our early registration, which is conducted 6 months before the start of the school year to ensure that it's an advocacy campaign wherein we tell down to the communities that parents have to bring in their children aged 5 to kindergarten. So for ages 6 to 9, about 1.3% are not in school. It improves in from the age group 10 to 12, and then as you're seeing in your screen, you're 13 to 14. And then it increases by the time they reach junior high school or grade 9. So 15 to 16, the number of those not in school increases until, of course, by the time they're 20 to 24 years old. So it would, if looking at this slide again, it would mean that we have learners who are not finishing secondary education. And we know that in the Philippines, a high school diploma is critical since it opens up doors for one to improve their chances of getting good employment, and of course proceeding to higher education and higher skills training. So in 2019, it's still relatively high. We have the report is saying that more than 10 million Filipino youth were not attending school. Number one reason is still employment, followed by employment or looking for a job, followed by marriage and family matters. And of course, at least now, by 2019, they're already saying that they're not in school because they already finished. So this is good news. But the lack of personal interest is still there, and illness and disability seem to have increased from the 2017 data. So same as with the 2017 report, we're seeing that there are still more males not in school because they're employed or looking for work, and they are still the ones saying, more of them are saying that they lack personal interest, that's why they're not in school. For marriage and family matters, of course, it's still the females who outnumber the males who said that they're not in school because they're attending to family matters or that they're married already. So that was pre-pandemic. So during the pandemic, we looked at reports, global reports, particularly from UNESCO, of what reasons have been cited for learners not being in school. So across the globe, they're saying that about 24 million learners from pre-primary to university levels were at risk of not returning to school or not in school in 2020 due to the pandemic. So the factors for not returning to school: financial constraints. We all know that with the lockdowns and with the pandemic, the economy has contracted. The global economy has contracted, and even in the Philippines, I think the last report on unemployment, we have about 4.4 million unemployed Filipinos, and when you take a look at it, that's a lot. And then since they are staying at home, they are in charge of household chores. Our youth are in charge of household chores. They were given additional tasks at home since they are doing remote learning, or if they are even enrolled. And then aside from household chores, some have been in charge of childcare, especially as parents or caregivers fell ill due to COVID or have passed away. And then another reason, as our children and youth stay at home, and because of poverty as well, caused by the pandemic, some were made to get married or earlier than usual. They have been placed in vulnerable positions. So the girls are either getting pregnant or getting married early. And then there's a fear of resurgence of the virus. As such, some are not really returning to school. So in addition to that, the learning loss and learning gaps incurred may also drive disadvantaged learners away from education. And from reports, this is the global report, it's saying that especially for certain economic groups, remote learning has not been that effective. And this is something that education agencies and officials should be very concerned with as we try to build back better and recover. So let me show you our numbers in the Philippines. This is for the Department of Education, basic education alone. So because of COVID, we have seen a reduction in our enrollment. But for public schools, we have seen an increase. We already, compared to last year's enrollment, we have already achieved more than 100%. In fact, there are 139,486 students more enrolled in public schools. It's with the private schools that saw a decrease in enrollment. And of course, this is due to the economic crunch since, of course, the private schools are not free. And we see some of the parents may be opting that their kids not go back to school due to economic difficulties. With our state universities and colleges offering basic education, there's also a reduction in enrollment. For alternative learning system, which is our second chance education program for out-of-school youth and adults, we also saw a decrease in number for this school year. And this is attributed to the fact that about 60 to 80% of ALS learners are youth and adults who are already working, so that when the pandemic hit, they prioritized looking for work. They prioritized putting food on the table over going to school. And then, of course, our Philippine schools overseas also saw a reduction in their enrollment. So as of January 15, our overall enrollment for this school year is lower by 1.06 million compared to the previous school year. So one of the programs that the Department of Education has worked on since the start of the administration is its alternative learning system program, which is the second chance education program for out of school children in special cases, youth and adults. So this should give them a chance to obtain their elementary and secondary diplomas or competencies in the K-12 curriculum that will be useful as they prepare for the world of work. Of course, the definition of alternative learning system is it's a parallel learning system that provides opportunities for out-of-school youth and adults to develop basic and functional literacy skills and to access equivalent pathways to complete basic education. It's a viable alternative to the existing formal education, which aims to empower learners to continue learning in a manner, time, and place suitable to their preference and circumstances, and for them to achieve their goals of improving their quality of life and becoming productive contributors to society. There are, with the passage of the law, the alternative learning system has additional programs. Of course, we have basic literacy for those who cannot read and write and count yet, and then accreditation and equivalency programs for those who have dropped out of elementary and secondary. And with the passage of the law, we are now required to also have an Indigenous Peoples Education Program, as well as academic focus bridging program and functional education and literacy programs, which will, in the event that our adult learners are not interested in getting an elementary or secondary diploma, at least they will get what we call micro certifications for certain competencies or skills that are found in the ALS K-12 basic education curriculum. The ALS curriculum is contextualized non-formal curriculum, and it's substantially aligned to the K-12 curriculum of basic education. And what we're saying here is that our graduates will also be able to access the K-12 exits of higher education, higher skills training, employment, and entrepreneurship. With the new curriculum, we introduced digital citizenship, which we are finding very useful, especially when we went into lockdowns and especially as we are now working on Industrial Revolution 4.0. The learning modalities available, and we want to maintain this even post-pandemic, modular instruction, online, digital, or mobile learning, of course, face-to-face learning sessions and tutorials. We have expanded radio and television-based instruction for ALS. In partnership with the industry, we are expanding the workshops, simulations, and internships for our learners so that they will inculcate work readiness skills and entrepreneurship. And of course, ensuring that the learning environment will be inclusive and safe. So as I've mentioned, those who will pass the A&E accreditation and equivalency tests will be eligible for junior high school, senior high school, college TESDA and employment. With the passage of the law, we are banking on the reforms that we have started to be institutionalized and to not be forgotten way past the administration. So what we're saying is that the institutionalization of the ALS program shall help ensure that the second chance basic education program does not have to be second class, and it's really the commitment of the Department of Education to continue recognizing the potential of even our out-of-school youth and adults to contribute to nation building and to be able to help us, especially as we build back better post-pandemic. So that's it. Thank you very much. I will be ready to answer questions after a while. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Asa Kambat. I think there's something really important that's starting to come together, which is about whether we're working at the strategy scale, like you are, we're working in the school scale or in the universities. Something about those that are furthest away from education opportunity have been pushed away even further, and that we're conscious of the actions that we need to take. And I think actually the ALS program is pretty inspirational in that it's on a national level. I think there are a lot of people can learn from that. Okay, certainly not something that we have. Perhaps we should. In terms of our next speaker is Sarah Dove, who has a huge amount of experience, over 15 years, working with children, just as we're talking about, that are some distance away from education or at risk of poor educational outcomes, and is actually passionate about engaging them and supporting their mental, emotional and mental well-being. Sarah's a fantastic speaker and has got some awesome tools which she uses too. So I hope we can appreciate that. Just quickly, in terms of questions, we should have 10 minutes or so at the end. And any questions that we can't answer, we will make sure that we get a written answer to. So over to Sarah, who will tell us a lot of the work she's been doing about young people's well-being. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and it's been a fascinating webinar so far. Just as Paul indicated, I'm going to be talking about supporting the well-being of children as they return to education. I'm going to be splitting between a couple of presentations just because I think the picture is so complex. I will briefly introduce myself as well. I come from a sociological perspective, and that's really important. I'm not a psychologist by trade, although I'm very passionate about children's mental well-being. I've worked, actually, you've made me sound younger than I am. I've actually worked for 19 years in what's called pupil referral units. So that's alternative provision for children that might be excluded from school and hospital schools as well as mainstream school. I'm currently completing a PhD as well, and I'm the author of the recently published book, Behaving Together, A Teacher's Guide to Nurturing Behaviour. And what I did during, so I'm from the UK, as you can probably tell from my accent, and there were a number of lockdowns for COVID-19 where children were asked to not attend school unless they were considered to be the most vulnerable. So what I wanted to look at is how children experience not attending school or this greater lockdown. So I surveyed a number of children, and the aims was really to explore children and young people's thoughts and having had returned to school. So I did two surveys. I did one in March last year about their thoughts about not going to school, and then I repeated it in October with slightly different questions about now they're back at school, what did that feel like for them and what were their concerns? The methodological approach were surveys, and they were open and closed questionnaires. I also looked at consideration of bias relating to mainstream school, and I noted one of the questions in the chat was around children with special educational needs, and that's something that I also looked at as well. It was administered through snowballing. So I contacted lots of different organisations, lots of different schools, and I used my Twitter-based account as well to say, you know, would you like to complete this as well? And I intentionally approached organisations for children in marginalised groups. So, for example, children in the Romany Traveller groups, or children who were undertaking treatment for cancer, for example, because I really wanted to make sure we had a range of different voices. And we had a number of different children that participated in the research. So for the second survey, we had 1,516 children and young people, 912 of whom attended mainstream school. So that is the education offer for the majority of children in the UK. 175 attended what's called pupil referral units or alternative provision. So those children are routinely children who have difficulties related to behaviour and they might be excluded from school, or perhaps even to prevent exclusion. That alternative provisions in the UK also include children with medical needs. 65 of those children attended special schools, and they were often for children with autistic spectrum conditions or for what's called social and emotional mental health. And 148 attended independent school. Independent schools are routinely fee-paying schools, and they might be for children whose families can afford to pay for additional funding, but they might also be where what's called the local authority fund their education because of their special educational needs, and the data doesn't really tell me which one it is. 9 children had specific health needs, which meant that they didn't attend school at all. And 9 were electively home educated, and that means that their parents let the local authority know that they're going to educate them at home. And you don't have to go to school in the UK, but you do have to have an education, and parents can make a decision that they elect to educate at home. And 5 children attended school by what's called a telepresent solution. So if they were too unwell, so let's say they had cancer, for example, a little robot, an avatar, attends a school in their stead, and they control it from the home environment. It's a really exciting way of engaging in school. I asked children about whether or not they had a medical condition that affected attending their school. And the majority of children indicated no, they were well and they were attending school, just over 84%. But a number of children which indicated they had a mental health need that prevented accessing school. So that was 6.83, which in real terms was 103 children. And then 36 children said they had a physical health need that was preventing access to school. That ranged from a whole different things I'm going to explore with you in a moment. A number of children, 77, said that I'm not going to school for another reason. And the majority of those children were children with special educational needs that didn't have a placement, for example, a school named for them, or because they weren't going to school because generally they were well, but they had COVID or they were self-isolating for various different reasons. So in terms of the children with medical needs, in terms of mental health, there was a significant number that self-indicated they had anxiety, 54, 22 said that they had depression, 6 didn't specify their mental health condition, they were quite private about it, and they would say things like, I don't want to tell you, but indicated they had a broad mental health condition. 4 had obsessive compulsive disorder, 4 indicated eating disorder in terms of anorexia nervosa, 1 had bipolar, and 3 children indicated they had attachment disorder. In terms of their physical health needs, a lot more children on this run of the survey indicated they had asthma, and that was really interesting in the wider context of COVID-19, and perhaps they had been shielding in the past, and whilst they were indicated they should be returning to school, they made the decision that actually their asthma meant that they would stay at home. 4 had bowel conditions, 2 had cancer, and you may be aware that the treatment for cancer can be very aggressive, especially for children, and might leave them very vulnerable to other kind of viruses such as COVID-19. 2 had chronic fatigue syndrome that you may know as ME, for example, 3 epilepsy, and 4 said that they had COVID directly. Children also indicated under the medical needs question that they had neurodevelopmental needs. In the spirit of children self-reporting, I've kept it under medical needs because that's how they interpreted it. 26 had autistic spectrum conditions, 7 attention deficit hyperactivity, and 2 oppositional defiance disorder. So a whole range of different children were contributing to this survey, and children that might not be heard in general surveys as well. I asked this question about, is there anything that's made things difficult going back to school? And what I did was coded the responses and themed them accordingly. The most significant thing that made it difficult for children to go back to school, and probably unsurprisingly, was COVID-19. 70 children indicated that they were still incredibly concerned about COVID-19. And this is something important to reflect about your own communities and what virus looks like in terms of there. So, for example, in the UK, there is increasing concern around the Delta COVID-19 variant, which seems to be more prolific in terms of catching. Children said things like, knowing that I'm in danger of getting a life-threatening virus. Also in the UK, we practice what was called social distancing, so making sure we spend time apart, but also I have my mask here, but also year group bubbles as well, where children were stuck within their year rather than being able to interact with other years. And some children spoke about the idea of the vulnerabilities within their home. Yes, as I have a vulnerable parent, I'm scared to catch COVID, as I don't want to be the cause of her death. So we think about, how do we plan and prepare for these children returning to school and some of the difficulties and challenges that they might have. Children were really concerned about new rules as well, and not really understanding what the rules were, being worried about other children not following them, but also the impact that the rules had on their social time. So children said things such as social distancing is not adhered to, it's too difficult in a large mainstream school. These are schools that could easily have 2,000 children. And one child said, I've showed my mum the videos. One child as well said the rules have made it a little bit difficult going back to school, as we have to get used to them. And this idea of those kind of rules and routines that might be changing quite significantly under short notice has been a real issue in the UK as well. One week children had to wear face masks in the corridors and then in the classroom, and now they don't, for example. So it's kind of following those more national rules and how that's implemented in the school environment. And one child said that the impact of the rules around their social development, don't like not playing with everyone in the playground and having lunch inside at my table. So how social activities are constrained and reduced. In the UK, we had loads of issues around exams about whether or not we were going to do them at all. So in year 11, routinely children would have a general certificate of secondary education in a range of subjects, maths, English, science, and other subjects that they've chosen. And this child said, I'm in year 11 and I was very stressed. We don't know what is going to happen with our GCSEs. I was very depressed and sleep deprived because I was treating my mock exams, which at one point I was not ready for, like my real exams, just in case we go back to centre assessed grades. The start of year 11 was an awful experience. I felt suicidal at some points. I start to feel better now because of personal reasons such as religion. So these kind of exams and how we're marking the end of school life have been really challenging for the children. It's just coming to an end for our year 11s and our year 13 to our additional education, but still been a big issue around children's mental well-being. And 15 children said actually the workload, so missing out on so much learning and the constant pressure to do well in every assessment and mock in case they're used for centre assessed grades. So again, this kind of issue around pressures from teachers. I'm going to show you some resources in a moment on my website because I've created loads of resources that directly relate to the children and what they've said. They're free to download. You can use as many as you'd like as well. But one thing I did was looking at priorities for children. So lots of children spoke about priorities as being a key concern. I really wanted to build some hope into this survey about what has helped, because the good news is children were really keen to tell me what things made it better for them going back to school. And 234 indicated friends. So children often wanted to engage with being back with their mates. And sometimes they did things like playing online and so on. But a lot of children said, seeing my friends has helped me go back to school. I was really concerned about children moving from their primary to their secondary education, where they often leave a lot of their primary school children and friends and move on to secondary. But a lot of children spoke about meeting new friends as they started to go to secondary, so really taking up that challenge. Other children spoke of the support of my friends, meeting with my friends, and being a community. So the idea that they had those shared experiences of COVID and then they're going back together was something that really helped a number of children. And one child said, even though I'm not very comfortable with change, I guess having new friends around me is okay. They do make me feel happy. So lots of kind of joy in these responses. And the good news is for the teachers sitting in this audience is that actually teachers help children go back to school. And I loved some of these quotes here. My amazing teacher. The teachers have helped me. But also some schools produced videos to help find our way around school. So one thing that a lot of schools in the UK did was had a one-way system to minimise social contact with people. Now that changed how children used the school environment. So what some head teachers and head of years did was video the routes for them, so children could be made to be prepared for some of those changes, and that really helped. But also to know that my teachers would be there to guide me during this time. And finally, probably my teachers, because they made sure how we felt and helped us along this journey. So notions around a mutual journey and a mutual experience were really key here. The other news is that family was a good thing as well. So mummy and daddy taking me, a talk from my parents at first, I was feeling nervous. So again, this reiterates a real need to have strong relationships between the school community and the family community, because the family might be mediating some of those conversations with their children. Confidence from my parents. But there was also some kind of negative things there as well. Friends, but also hating being at home with my annoying family. And we can acknowledge that for some children who might live in smaller accommodation, have less access to resources, which was spoken about in the first presentation, actually being with your family on a kind of constant basis can be really challenging. There might not be any issues around domestic violence or arguments, but just being in the same space with the same person can be really challenging. And some parents had to continue to work as well. So I was ready to go back after so long. My parents both worked, dad for the railways, mum in a school. So it wasn't the big fun lockdown others had had. So this idea that actually I had to kind of keep on going back to school anyway. So really it wasn't fun for me. I had to kind of sit around, and that was one feature as well. And I asked the question, is there anything you might want to tell us that might help you or other children go back to school? And 20 children spoke about notions of teachers. So teachers being stressed makes students stressed. Being able to talk to the teachers and calm and understanding teachers was a key feature. Covid-19 precautions as well. So not for my age group as much, and we can see from the writing that this is an old child, but for younger years, it might potentially help to teach students why social distance is important and the actual science behind it. So this notion of education and things like why and how vaccines work, not to scare them, but to help them realise the importance and science behind what they are doing. Doing this also might make students feel safer coming back to school, as they can see why the measures take place to protect them. So this idea of kind of public health approach and really kind of, this rather than scaring you, this is why it's helpful. This is what might be good for you. And again, I've looked at creating some resources relating to that might be helpful depending on your context. Children also spoke about this idea of internal resources. So actually, we've all had a tough time. So again, this idea of community, but remember you're worth it. And if you keep a positive attitude, school will be easier. Now, that's not always possible for children, because not always children have that kind of internal resource and motivation, but it's something that children felt that they wanted to share. And also think about what you're doing before you do it. So this idea of that kind of thinking about your actions before you maybe break social rules in terms of COVID-19. And also thinking about school positively. So the idea of a relationship with school, your school always try to make it as safe as possible for you to attend healthily. So again, that reiterates notions of good communication. And one child said, I like school a lot. I want it to be open all year. And school is very safe and there's nothing to worry about there. So this idea of reiterating these kind of positive thoughts around school. Now, not as many children as I thought spoke about the idea of supporting mental health, but there were a few different kind of strategies that children spoke about. They said, check in on us. If we look upset, you don't have to make a scene in front of everyone, but at least ask us how we're doing. It's not easy coming back to school after all this. So this idea of acknowledgement of the children's experiences. And also, we're not just moody teenagers. We're real people with real feelings that deserve to be acknowledged. And I think we can all share that approach. And a younger child said, hug a teddy if you're worried or scared. So this idea of physical contact being really important. And one child just said, gives children some support with mental health. And again, I've got some resources related to that. I'm going to skip through this just because of timing. But the idea of happiness was a big feature as well. And what did you enjoy at school? There's lots of things around next steps. So actually, children were missed off this research, despite my best intentions. So children who were perhaps non-verbal or didn't have the cognitive ability or specific special educational needs. I would really like to conduct interviews with children and young people directly. But there also needs to be further analysis, which is what I'm undertaking at the moment, and so on. As part of this work, what I've done is I have created, if you go onto my website, which is phoenixgrouphq.com resources, you can see that I've got a number of different resources. And one of them is going back to school resource pack. If you click on that, there is a 15-page resource pack, which tells you a little bit about the survey, but also, you know, what rules have changed, because that was one of the children's key concerns. You know, what are you excited about, how you're feeling, and so on. You're more than welcome to take these resources as you wish. So just to reiterate, phoenixgrouphq.com/resources. But I've also created what's called the Reintroduction Hub. I'm just renaming it at the moment as Phoenix Hub, but you can still nab it at the reintroductionhub.com, and you can register for a free trial. Now, in terms of the Reintroduction Hub, it's a web-based resource that measures the well-being of individual students using quick-fire low-stake quizzes. There's 12 frameworks across a range of themes, so threat, which is perception and reality, but things like emotional regulation as well. And depending on what the children answer, they're given targeted resources. So let's say, for example, a child answers questions, and I note, for example, here, that actually they don't have any concerns or fears about COVID-19, they won't be given the same resources as perhaps your 11-year-old child that is really fearful of COVID-19 because actually they've had direct experience of it, they might have suffered a bereavement, they might have asthma. They will be given different resources accordingly. And the idea is that there's only 6 or 7 questions that then fires out different resources for those children. So you're more than welcome to look at that in more detail. Please feel free to have a free 2-week trial as well. I've just set out some reflective questions to help you plan, depending on where you are internationally, but reflective questions to help you plan. How can you find out about children's experiences? And again, I've given some resources for that might help frame some questions. Also thinking about how children's responses may evolve over time. So, for example, in the UK, they change quite significantly. Before I get told off for stealing all of the time, you can email me, you can connect to me on social networking through Twitter, and if you wish to have further discussions, then please feel free as well. Thank you very much for your time today.
Hi, Sarah. I'm sure we wouldn't be telling you off. It's an absolutely fascinating piece of research that we've got and from you. And I think what is really, really clear is that we've looked at the system and what we can do, particularly in the Philippines around ALS and the contribution that makes to building back in a different way. We've looked at schools and the academic side of how we can support young people around their learning loss. And then there's this key, feels like the key to the lock, which I've been looking at the chat as we've gone through. Yes, it's about teacher relationships. Yes, it's about emotional well-being. And I know I can see from people, colleagues in the Philippines and who are attending that this emotional aspect is critical. So it's brilliant that we've got some tools. we can think about the system, and we can think about that learning loss. That's wonderful. We've only got 10 minutes for questions, and I know that Jan has got some questions to put up. So if you could do that, Jan, that'd be really helpful. Any questions that we can't answer, just to reiterate, we will get a written answer for, and we will post. So you'll be able to get the answer that you need. And yes, the slides will be made available. Okay, so you'll be able to get them through the Nisai Trust site. Okay. So Jan, we got a question to come up. Okay, that's one for you, Todd.
So no, the parents weren't actually involved in the interventions. This were educator-led interventions that happened back at the school, and that has really been shown to be a huge equalizer. I think publicly funded education has really shown that this is a place where all students can come to be able to receive instruction. And when all students came back to school after the summer, then we saw the learning slopes of all students to be equal as they continued on. I think that's one of the really important things. We can't always control what's happening at home. We can't always influence what parents are doing. Parents are stretched due to economics, health, and other resources. But school is a place that can really help equalize that place. But equalization doesn't mean that all students get the exact same thing. It does mean that we spread our resources towards those most needy to be able to promote their growth faster.
Thank you, Todd. Okay, Assistant Secretary Amber, I think that's for you in terms of the data that you're including. So this regular students or those with learning difficulties as well, including your ALS program.
Does the data include
those with special needs, not just but or is it just regular students?
right? In the report of the Philippine Statistics Authority, they did not disaggregate to say that even the to specify the specific to specify which learners are there. But one of the reasons for not being in school is disability and sickness. So I'm not sure if the SPED students will fall under that reason or category.
Okay.
But there is such a reason given for not being in school: sickness and disability. Sickness, yeah, sickness.
Yeah. So I think the assumption that we can make then is that that was included, the special needs children were included in that data and fell out, if you like, as one of the categories. That's really helpful. Thank you. Do we have another question, Jan? This is the big one, everybody. So how
I think in education, in terms of looking at these issues, I think we need to step back and look at online learning. I'm worried that online learning is more, or has been seen more as this emergency online learning where we all were thrown into online learning versus a well-developed online learning platform with really a lot of training that was going into supporting those students. I know in Canada, we're really looking at this to be able to say, now that this is an alternative way that we can deliver online or deliver education to students who might have medical health issues, so are in hospitals and are at home for medical reasons, who are geographically having a hard time getting into school. So instead of spending 2 hours on the bus each way, they can be able to access school. So we're really seeing this as an opportunity to step back, learn from this experience so that we can continue to provide this as a resource to students who choose to use it.
Something interesting about the research from Nisai Trust on this issue is to do with, in terms of online learning, is to do that quality and good pedagogy really, really matters. There is no substitute for good teaching, quality teaching, and strong relationships. And that seems to be from the research in the UK, and also, as Todd said, in North America, that the online learning has been seen as, if you like, a catch-all cure. In actual fact, it's a highly specialized form of education that we've had to use in the short term. So there's lots to come yet around online learning. Okay, thank you. Anybody else got any thoughts about what else we'll need as we move forward over the next semester and beyond?
I think from my perspective, I think we need to ask children directly, because it's things that affect their education, the way that they kind of see the world. And I think we are missing an opportunity to talk to children directly in whatever way, because actually if everyone responds to COVID-19 and the kind of the constraints differently. So, you know, in this room, we have quite a few hundred people, and we will all have different experiences depending on our own personal context. And that will be the same for the children that we work with and for. So, for example, for me, I'm all right about lockdown. I quite like being at home. But for other people, actually, it's really difficult, or they might have had domestic violence in their home, or actually for them home was a safe place where school wasn't, or that they really enjoyed the mediation through online opportunities. So I think if we don't ask children directly, and teachers and everyone else, then I think we're missing an opportunity. So I would always say go back and find out from your community.
Okay. I'm just very conscious of time now. We've only got 2 minutes left of the webinar. There's been a lot of queries around slides and so on and so forth, and I know we will be able to make those available to everybody. Also about certification. A certification will also of attendance will also be available via the Nisai Trust. Have anybody got any final comments that they want to make from the panel today?
Paul, let me just inform those who are in attendance here that the Department of Education is currently finalizing the basic education development plan of the Philippines, and this will be until 2030. And we are taking into consideration the lessons that we've learned out of course, this pandemic and the previous years. And one of the pillars of that plan is on equity. We want to make sure that those who were already falling behind previously will be given more attention and more support in the next 10, 15 years by the Department of Education, so that we will have a more equitable treatment of our learners, and so that the reasons for them not being in school will be addressed. Of course, the plan is not only limited to the Department of Education. We will have to involve the other government agencies and the communities as well. So that is for DepEd. We're seeing to it that the equity pillar will be, at least the components will be funded. We will have an action plan really laid out, so that in the next 10 years, we will be able to, learning from the experience of COVID as well, we will be able to achieve what we said we would achieve for the country when it comes to education.
And I think that just is such a strong message to send out. What have we learned? We've learned that we're all different, and that we need to support those differences if we're going to, as you said, build back better and build back different. And that message is the same wherever we are. There's a lovely thing here. We've ranged from Canada to the Philippines today. We've had lots of people joining, and everybody wants those same outcomes, and everybody's acting with good intention. So I think there is a great opportunity, and thank you for sharing that with us. That's fantastic. So if everybody's comfortable, I want to say thank you for attending the webinar. I would say thank you to Assistant Secretary Ambat, to Sarah, and to Todd, who Todd's in the middle of his night. Thank you for coming and giving so much of your time and your understanding. And to everybody who's attended. Hopefully we'll see you soon, and we'll do another one of these webinars. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks very much, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for this
Thank you so much,
opportunity.
Thank you.
everyone.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Stay safe, everyone. Stay safe.
Take care.
Stay safe.
Salamat.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for watching. And
Thank you sa
for those
Asek
who are
Ambat,
asking,
salamat po.
Thank you so
who are
much.
asking about the e-certificate, okay? So you can request your e-certificate, okay, by
Thank you,
filling up,
Lisa.
okay, the feedback form.
Thank you, Lisa.
Okay.